Everyone, my name is Joseph Arquillo. I manage people and business operations at a company called Hydro. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel with some awesome panelists here. We'll be talking about how human resources has been experiencing a shift in recent years. One of them in recent years, one that's like aiming to kind of rehumanize the business. We've seen the titles for this department change from HR to people ops, and I can't wait to dive deeper into this. But before we go there, I'd love for all of our panelists to give an introduction, like who you are, what company you work for. Let's just start there.
Morning, guys. I'll go first. I'm Alexa. I am the founder of a group called Perks, and we are the creators of the People Ops Society, as well as the Perks Conventions, and another brand called Showcase, which is a virtual benefit platform. So my history comes from, I've been in the employee experience space for many years, sort of trying to get organizations to find the employee experience more accessible and to create them and use their imagination in creating them. And so very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tasha Kitty. I'm the Chief People Officer for Panorama Education. We are an ed tech company located downtown. I've spent my career in HR or people ops, we'll get there, in various industries, both in cybersecurity, the nonprofit space, financial services for quite a long time, and then marketing and advertising. So a little bit of depth in a few different industries there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Patterson. I'm the Director of People and Culture for a tech company called Machine Metrics. Our headquarters is in Northampton, Massachusetts, but we also have a Boston location as well, with presence throughout the United States. So we specialize in industrial SaaS IoT. I've been in multiple industries, including healthcare, but find myself always returning to startups.
Awesome. Well, thank you three for the introductions, and I say let's dive right in there. So, Alexa, do you want to begin with defining people operations?
Oh God, you gave this to me. Okay, fine.
Remember, we talked about this.
We did talk about this. I was warned. Okay. Oh, as my chair recedes to the floor. So I think people ask this question a lot, and I get asked this question a lot as the founder of the People Ops Society. What is people operations? And my first answer is that it is not just a new name for HR. We are not putting lipstick on a pig here. But I think it's really important to think about the context with which people operations came onto the scene, right? So if you look at this, I used to say 30 years, but I realized 30 years is actually just like the 80s at this point, or the 90s. So that's not actually that long ago. So let's maybe say 50 years ago. In the world of sort of post-industrial revolution, when a lot of organizations were systemizing, they had this function of HR, which is originally created to actually ensure when states started to have the requirement to put healthcare in place for factory workers, the human resources organization or part of the organization was brought on to make sure that first and foremost employees had healthcare, and then ultimately evolved to be sort of a protectorate of the organization to say, let's make sure we also don't get sued, let's make sure everybody has healthcare. And you guys can sort of do the math sort of up to what is sort of modern day HR, which can unfortunately have a negative connotation. So when you think about people operations is this new title and really a new version of this profession that is emerging that actually takes a lot of similar execution and says, yes, we need to make sure you have healthcare. Yes, we need to make sure, you guys have safe policies and everybody can work well together, but they've sort of officially reversed the priorities. And so people operations is a role that comes into place to bridge the gap directly between what the organization needs to do and the wants and needs of the people that need to do it. And so people operations really is the gap. So rather is filling the gap to do that. So rather than saying, okay, I represent the company and it's my job as, old school HR to just make sure we don't get sued and make sure you have healthcare and put a bunch of policies in place. People operations looks at it from a totally different lens and says, we are the bridge between what the organization needs to do and what the people need to do it. And so we're gonna focus on what we can do to enable our people and what we can put in place to empower them, and also make sure that we design a lifestyle for them that allows them to be here and be successful. So it's not that there aren't things that people operations people don't do that a quote unquote traditional HR person would do. Every organization structures this differently. You do have comp, you have payroll, people have to get paid. That's not going to change. But the way that the organization looks at it is as if the people operations team is an internal consulting group to look at the employee base and say, how can we improve this such that we are getting the end product that we need, which is ultimately a successful workforce. How'd I do?
Amazing. I was going to say, Tasha, Cynthia, do you have anything to add about the holistic approach to people, the enablement, like being the bridge between the needs of the company and the people?
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Go ahead, Tasha.
Yeah.
I think Alexa covered it very well.
It's my coffee. I've had a lot of coffee this morning.
Yeah, I guess I just would tack on that part of that transformation, that evolution. Way back it was staff and then personnel, and then became human resources, and now people operations. So it's interesting to think about how the evolution of that basically went from maybe a way to think about it as more fear-based for the business type of approach to now a people empowering approach through people operations.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I'm so excited that it's got a great name, and it's, we like when organizations and industries start renaming things, that's a really powerful movement. That's like, okay, we're done with that. Like, we're moving on. And like I said, a lot of organizations just change names. Oh, now you're the head of people instead of the head of HR. That's lipstick on a pig. True people operations is a different lens with which you, and most professions like Tasha and Cynthia, professionals in the space, are just, they're of a new era, they're of a new guard. So it's really exciting.
So let's talk about, is people operations a subset of HR or all-encompassing department that accounts on HR as well? Like, does this distinction matter? I know people are going to ask these questions about, like, okay, we said that it's like, is it interchangeable? Is it a subsection? Tasha, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think people operations is the whole section, right? And people have different roles within people operations. And the way that I've traditionally seen it done, and even the way that we do it at our organization, is that we have someone who focuses on people operations in terms of a tactical sense or an administrative sense. So think things like benefits, processing payroll, processing different types of operational tasks. But that doesn't mean that that's the whole people team. So you take that and you transform the name of people operations and you apply it to your organization, and you have a people partner instead of an HR business partner, which is what you used to see it in yesteryears, to Cynthia's earlier point. My recruiter, for example, is a talent management and acquisition people partner. So there's all different ways that we're accessing the humans that we work with or want to work for us or with us, and how we bring them along their employee life cycle. And I think that that's one of the major shifts to Alexa's earlier point, is that we have this kind of realm of how we take care of the whole person. And encompassing just the name people in that perspective, I think bridges that gap.
Yeah, and I would just say, does the distinction matter? I think we talked about this a little bit on our prior call in thinking about this, as we're all sort of tasked with the question for the first time, but the distinction only matters if the intention is there, right? So again, lipstick on a pig, it doesn't matter what you call it. It matters if you are truly approaching the way that you are sort of looking across the employee life cycle, everything from recruiting all the way to exit interviews. If you are approaching that with a lens that is, how do I maximize your lifestyle as an employee here to benefit our organization and what we need from you, right? So if you're applying that across your life cycle, or maybe some organizations, as they start to make this transition away from sort of a traditional HR group, will actually just pick sections of the lifestyle to focus on. A lot of times that can start with recruiting, because that can be sort of like, if you don't have a recruiting pipeline, the rest of it doesn't matter. And for other people, it's like, let's focus on internal, development. And so it doesn't have to be an all or nothing switch, but I think perfectly to Tasha's point, like, it doesn't matter if the actual implementation is not changing from a standpoint of, we're not viewing you as a liability, we are viewing you as an asset. And if that's not actually happening in practice, then it doesn't matter what you call it. I have also seen organizations do HR as an operations function now, and people as, again, this internal consulting sort of focused role. So that's my 2 cents.
So we received a question that said, when you talk about people operations, it sounds like you're referring to people experience. Operation oftentimes is associated with execution of highly repetitive work, mainly admin. Creating employee experience is much more than that. Does anyone want to tackle that question on like, where do we find that balance? Like, yes, it'll be that admin portion of it, but like, where does the employee experience or people experience come into this?
Joe, I just, I think it really resonates with what I just shared earlier about having a people operations manager on my team who does those mainly administrative pieces. But one thing I do want to separate is that they too play a part in the employee experience, right? And so if someone's doing the administrative pieces of benefits and you have an employee who goes out on a leave, that is very much an experience for that person who works for your organization, or someone who's returning from a leave, or if you're working with a contractor and perhaps they have they sent in an invoice that you didn't get and you need to have a different exchange. That still is a people experience, and one that folks will really remember. No one ever says thank you for paying me this week because they've gotten it, but let something happen, right? And then they'll remember that experience. So I even wouldn't necessarily separate the people experience from those folks who are doing operational work. I know Cynthia wanted to jump in there as well.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Tasha. I think that people operations right now is a new moniker, a new name. But people operations is literally all about employee experience. So to give you an example, for me at a company that I worked for, our people team, actually we had our own mission statement. So we had the company mission statement, but then we also had a mission statement about what we wanted to do for our employee experience. So completely tied together in that. And I encourage people, if you're considering doing departmental mission statements, they're a really great way to make sure that everybody's aligned. So whether or not they're doing administration work, talent acquisition, strategy, everybody is aligned in the same mission.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very cool, Cynthia. I actually would argue that to the question, it's a trickle down, right? If the experience is what your end goal is, right? If you could say, here's what I want every employee in our organization through their life cycle, through their various stages, given their various backgrounds, to think, to feel, to do, to be supported in, all of the execution of that is directly below it, right? And the same teams are working together to both design that experience as well as execute it. And to Tasha's earlier point, somebody's got to cut the checks. So there is a lot of operation involved. And I think the moniker actually comes from this idea that you are supporting the operation of people. And so operations, I mean, Joseph is the perfect example. He does ops for, ops is in his title, even though he's in people ops. And so it is still seen as there's still things you have to execute. And I think it comes down to really the moniker being the group with which that says, okay, we not only design the experience, but we're in charge of executing it. And that being a really important distinction and a very empowering distinction, right? Because you want your HR team to be able to go across the organization and implement cultural changes, policy changes, leave changes, whatever it may be. You need to be able to operate and to implement those things. And so I think that's where the moniker comes, but it's a common, Jalata, that's a common question and a good one, because it can get confused, but the employee experience is always at the top.
Awesome. Tasha, I think you said like people don't recognize when they get paid, but they sure as hell recognize when
when they don't
get paid.
Absolutely.
So moving forward, so why do we think we've seen this shift towards people operations? Cynthia, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. To me, there are several factors, and I'm looking forward to hearing other people's input on this as well. But I would say that probably globalization and availability of information is the biggest factor. We have all this information at our fingertips. We're connected with companies, we follow companies, we're connected with people we know and also don't know. What they have to say and what they have to share about their company and their work environment, that information is just easily accessible. And so with that, companies now realizing this are looking at people now as, oh, you know what, people are our biggest asset. Despite what the balance sheet says, people definitely are our biggest asset right now. And companies have responded by creating more focus around employer branding. So not just for thinking about product and marketing, it's actually now part of a company's image and being able to attract talent. So even in the recession right now, employees or candidates are actually looking for companies that are mission-based, core values that align with themselves, even in this very tough job market right now. So I believe that that's the reason for the shift, is this, this open connection, communication with people you do and don't know, and companies the shift to realizing that that has power.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a balance sheet, and as a business owner and a startup founder myself, I understand how expensive people are, but I think exactly to your point, Cynthia, and to Tasha's earlier point, companies have finally gone, wait a minute, I have to stop looking at this line item and going like, ugh, people are so expensive, and looking at that line item and going like, I need to make that line item work for me. Like, I need to make sure they are happy. I need to make sure they want to stay. I need to make sure that we are engaging them. And so I think that's been a really powerful shift in mindset for people. And I couldn't agree more that this is about a change in the information age. 15 years ago, you couldn't go on Glassdoor and look at the review of an organization and look at all of what the former employees have said and reach out to your friend from college on LinkedIn who used to work there. You can decide what an employer brand is and how you feel about it before you even take a first interview now. Like, there's so much information available as to what an employer is, what it's like to work there. And people are doing that. I mean, they're getting all this information and all this sort of prejudice effectively about your organization before they even talk to you. And so that's just, I think, totally changed the game for people to realize that, like, hey, my employer brand really matters. And I really need to focus on that line item because it's the biggest one I got.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Joe. I think one of the other, reasons that it's evolved actually happens outside of the workplace, right? And so you think of the things that are happening right now with regards to the demographics of how workforces are changing and aging, right? And so we have very newer workforces that have different ideals of what should happen in the workplace than the ideals of yesteryear, right? And so when I think of my parents' workplace, it is not the workplace that my son, who's now 19, is going to be entering in the next few years. And so I think a lot of that is a shift. People bring a different part of themselves to work today than they did 30, 40 years ago. And then you take that and you take Cynthia's point about being globalized. I think there's also these external influences when it comes to racial injustice, ethnic discrimination, what our whole selves, what it means to bring your whole self into the office. So before you would kind of work with your employee in the, hey, I'm coming in here to do this job, I'm leaving, and then I go home and I do this in this place, and there's this separation. And what we've seen is there's less and less separation between work and the person. Right? There is this kind of need to be one, to bring your whole self to work, to recognize when there are external influences that are impacting the people who are there to do the job. It makes it a little bit more difficult for them to come to work and to focus or to feel safe or to be able to speak up about different things. And I think that is a huge shift from what I saw when I first entered HR to now as being people folks.
Yeah, and exactly, Tasha, the reality is, like, if people are going to bring their whole self to work, now the organization has to deal with the whole person. So rather than creating this organization where it's like, oh, I would never talk to HR about that, I would never tell them what I'm thinking about, because there used to be, like, I worked on Wall Street out of college, and everybody taught me, like, you don't tell HR anything because they'll just find a reason to fire you. Like, that was the mentality. And now I think it's like, no, I need to know who you are and what your expectations are as a person, and you're going to bring your whole self to work. So I got to deal with the whole person, and I got to set you up for success here, because if you just take that baggage home and are resentful of me as an employer when you leave, then we have also not accomplished our mission. So I think that's spot on.
So we have another question, and it says, how can job seekers best navigate the disconnect between applying to people teams versus HR teams? For example, if I state I'm seeking people roles, do I miss out on HR roles that can give me good experiences to set me up for a people career? Cynthia, do you want to talk about this first?
I think because of the fact that we're in a transition period right now, I think that there is not, from a title perspective, anything different about the positions necessarily. A person who has a people mission culture could be using the words human resources, and then also vice versa, talking about intent versus outcome. Since we're in the transition period right now, I would not be dissuaded by applying for a company that has a human resources title versus a people ops title. Really look at that job description to see if there's a lot of mention around how they treat their people. What is it that they're looking for you from behaviors? Are they really focusing on the years of experience that you have to have 19 years of experience and had to have your PhD when you're 6 type of thing? If all the other things come into line for you from a core value standpoint, then I would not worry about that for now. Some industries are going to be always lag a little bit in this area, just because of the fact that if you think about everything from a cultural perspective to also, I know it sounds silly, but things like print, digital print or physical print, things that we had talked about, references, human resources. If you think about the government, for example, I don't know if the governments would be making the switch to people ops anytime soon. But definitely those smaller companies, more nimble and agile companies would be making that transition.
So Tasha, I have a question for you. So we talked about like job descriptions and titles here. Do you agree with like Cynthia's assertion that like we should just look at like what is the role, what does it encompass?
I think that, so to the person who asked the question, totally agree with Cynthia. Looking at the title may not tell you if that's kind of going to give you that people experience versus that kind of a more conservative or rigid HR experience. The best way to do that is to, one of Alexa's earlier point, investigate the culture. That'll tell you a lot. That'll tell you more about what type of culture you're walking into, what the organization is looking for. There is so much information at our fingertips now to understand the culture before you come in. And one of the things that I encourage folks to say when they're going through an interview process, so once they've made their way into the door, if you will, tell me the things about the culture that I won't find in your handbook. Right? Like, so the handbook's going to give you everything that, you know, hey, what's our unlimited PTO, or how do we manage sick leaves? And, you know, what are the perks in the office? And do we have lunch on Fridays? It won't tell you how decisions are made. It won't tell you how teams are empowered. It won't tell you if your people or HR team is seen as a partner or a facilitator of people. And so I think those are the ways to get it. Titles are arbitrary, job descriptions are helpful, but culture is something that no one is going to be able to avoid in this day and age. There's too many ways to figure out what that organization's culture is. And if you can't find it, that should be one of the first questions that you ask when you're looking for a role.
I just want to say I love that, Tasha. I had that as one of my job interview questions, and I do not currently have that in my toolkit right now. So thank you for bringing that. I'm adding it to mine, and I hope everybody else is adding this to their toolkit as well.
Good one.
Sorry, I just realized, I know with Zoom, you're on mute most of the time. We actually have a lot more questions coming in. Alice, I'm going to get to yours next, but I want to tackle the first one from Jamie. What are your thoughts on the idea that people ops HR is a cost center and not revenue generating, and the future of the profession? Does people ops HR get laid off first before salespeople?
I just, Tasha's reaction to this question is like, it's just my favorite thing in the world. I love this question. But Tasha, if you want to go first, take it away. This one gets me fired up.
I chuckle now because your talent is your biggest differentiator. Hands down, period. Anyone can build, an app that addresses, I don't know, ordering your groceries. People are your biggest differentiator. You lose your talent, you lose your knowledge, you use your foundation. You mess up your reputation and your brand. No one wants to come work with or for you. Your people are the center of your operations. They're the heartbeat. They're making sure folks are paid, folks are getting there on time. They have an equitable process when they're in the workforce. They are making sure that they are being assessed and evaluated and grown and developed. And if they will seek it someplace else now. I said earlier, the years of staying at the same employer for 30 years are flat out gone, not happening, right? And so you need to really cater to that person, that people. And one of the things, I know we're in Startup Boston, and one of the biggest fails is not bringing on your people team soon enough, right? You will lose knowledge. You will lose the people that you need. And so, you know, the organizations that don't see people teams in HR as a partner, someone to do thought partnership with, that, hey, if you're going to make this change in your business line that affects your customer, let's talk about how that's going to affect your team and what they need to be onboarded into supporting that product, or else you'll have burnout, right? And so there's this direct correlation, not to HR being its only, being a business function on its own. It is also one that's critical to the success of the outcome of the sales team. It's critical to the success of the outcome of the client, success of the customer service team. It's critical to the outcome of the folks who are marketing. So it plays such a interdependent role that it's one of the things that if a company doesn't see it as that and doesn't set strategic HR goals, doesn't allow HR to share what those goals are, to show their impact across the organization and in the different streams, then that's likely not the organization for someone like myself, but it's likely an organization that really puts them into this kind of hire and fire mode that I think someone else said earlier, like it was just kind of staffing personnel and done. I'll get off my soapbox. I was soapbox.
Wait, I want to jump on the box with you real quick, because so I have to say thank you to Jamie for asking this question, because this is also one of the fundamental things that differentiates, I think, people operations from what we will hopefully see in a decade as sort of the prior years of HR, is this mindset of this being a cost center, right? And so first and foremost, just do me a favor and picture if you were the head of a part of an organization that you knew your leadership team just viewed as a money suck. Like, just imagine how that would make you feel and what you would be compelled to do for that part of the organization if you're like, everyone above me just thinks we waste money. Like, that mentality is corralling your team into spending money and not getting any results for it. So I'll give you a very basic example, right? Your people team is in charge of designing your employee experience. Let's talk about perks, because I know that world pretty well, but it's a really easy example of this. Your people team can do the work to identify the perks and the lifestyle benefits that your employees will enjoy, utilize, appreciate. And I have seen it time and time again that you can implement very basic, very inexpensive services for your team that will save you dollars in raises and salary later. So for example, my sister works for an industrial distribution company that I will not name. And she said to me flat out, she said, I would give $10,000 to $20,000, she's well paid, but I'd give $10,000 to $20,000 of my salary back if they would just bring healthy food options to the office and give me access to some sort of exercise or food, exercise or gym at the office. We are talking about a gym in her facility would cost like less than $10,000 to put up, and they would not have to pay her and all of her colleagues that want to work out $10,000 to $20,000 more in salary. That's the value, that there's an arbitrage for the salary values and the cost values of employees to some of the stuff that people operations can implement. And $10,000 for a gym versus $10,000 raises for 100 employees is no joke. That is not cost center, that is cost savings. And so there is a fair amount of employee optimization. And I know this is going to go to Allison's question too about D&I, but if you are empowering the people group to make those decisions, and again, thinking them as the gap between, okay, leadership and the organization needs this, and the people are asking for and want this to work, you are going to find ways to articulate to the employee, we can do that for you, but here, let's think about the expense. Here, let's think about ways to get that for you that doesn't harangue our margins so we can't raise our next round of funding, right? Like, you can have those conversations if you empower your people leader. Your people leader has to be at the table. If they're not at the table and they're just your cost center, then honestly, you should just have a compliance person and be done. And now I'll go off my soapbox.
So Cynthia, I was going to say, now, do you agree with this? Are you going to be the lone one who says like, no, it's a cost center, or?
Oh
Careful,
my gosh,
Cynthia.
just for fun to be fun to play devil's advocate. No, not really. I not only agree with Tasha and Alexa, but I feel what Tasha actually said, talking about cost center. So the question was about two things. It was about cost centers, and then also, is this basically considered a position that is not prioritized in a company? So first thing, and I think Alexa, you just said this last, was leadership buy-in. If you have a leadership team that doesn't understand the value of what HR strategy does, it's our job to be able to convince them. And if for whatever reason you're unable to convince them, then maybe it's time to find a new opportunity. But one of the ways, if you want to be able to compel your leadership team or continue to be able to enforce the importance of people, we do use data, right? It's the modern age. We all use data. I'll give you one example, actually, I guess 2 examples. If you think about employee retention, let's think about the fact that turnover due to things like legacy knowledge, skills, cohesion of the team, project momentum, I mean, just add all those things up together. If you consider that, we'll just do a low average, that it's 15% of an annual salary for a person. You go ahead and start thinking about those retention numbers, right? You start adding in things like the culture that Tasha was talking about. Is this a place that I want to be at? You start talking about perks and benefits, things that make life easier and better for people. You add all those things up, you think about that retention number, you think about that turnover number, and pretty soon you have this monumental figure in unrealized dollars. And so if you're really trying to make the case for understanding why, use HR data. There's tons of metrics out there for you to be able to take a look at, just Googling it. So I would say that that's one way to be able to, share the importance of people, of the role. And then the other one was about, just being, again, is an account executive, sales department more important than the other role? There are times, in my opinion, that it's, you can have a whole bunch of specialists that focus on HR disciplines and people. And so for me, I really love it when people have a variety of things that they're involved in the HR discipline. So for example, maybe you are a benefits analyst, so you're really good at numbers, but you also really like giving presentations for open enrollment or something like that. Maybe if there was a downsizing or there was a new opportunity to open in the company that you'd like to look at that was like learning and development, you'd be able to transfer those skills. So I would just say that, in order to be able to be more nimble and within the people space, just keep those options open as well. And you'll never have to worry about whether or not one department is more important than the other if HR is just a cost center.
Awesome. I like the facet about adaptability. I think we all all agree that people are really like the heart of a business and we really need to take care of them. For sake of time, we've actually have more questions. I'm going to keep our conversation moving along. And Chelsea asks, do you have any tips for encouraging an older generation of ownership to see people ops through a modern lens? Who wants to tackle this one first?
Talk about the balance sheet. Just tell them how much money Cynthia just did the math for us. I think the retention conversation, I think, is a very common, like, here's how we're going to justify our value. But I also think there's a layer right underneath that tends to get to people, which is how much fat do you have in your organization and how much is that costing you? So I know retention is like this really obvious thing that you can monetize. I think it's arguably, to Cynthia's point, like the easiest, sort of most obvious argument to make. But also think about all the people that are sitting in your organization. And I'm sure things like pandemics have highlighted this, but think about all the people that are sitting in your organization that are thinking about leaving, aren't happy, aren't optimized in their role. All of that is costing dollars. And the best possible thing you can do as an organization, and an older generation might understand this concept, is get them out in a way that optimizes the exit for you as an organization, right? So rather than saying, oh my God, nobody can ever leave, it's like, no, we want to keep that number as low as possible. But if someone needs to go, we want them to let us know it's coming and help us make the transition, because that's how we're going to keep the cost of that transition down, is to be aware, like, hey, Jane joined the organization. She only really ever had 3 or 4 years in mind because this is a step for her into something else. And we weren't ever going to be her 30-year, to Tasha's point, doesn't happen anymore, her 30-year employer. So we want to see that coming, and we want to reduce the cost of that transition for ourselves. But I also think it's just, times are changing. You got to be honest about that with your leadership team. Hey, look at our comparable organizations and look what they're doing. Look at the way that our employer brand is being, talked about or not talked about. Some organizations don't have any employer branding. Most startups don't have that problem, but older, industrial distribution company that my sister works for is a perfect example. And all you can do is beat your drum and chip away where you can and make 2-degree changes as you can, and eventually you'll turn the boat around. But anyway, I don't want to belabor the point.
Tasha, it looks like you want to say something.
I'll be brief. I think we should switch the mindset of saying an older generation versus, and I know that there are different impacts and different needs from the employee perspective. What I needed when I first entered the workforce isn't what I need as an employee now. But I really think it's a difference between more conservative or traditional culture and a more contemporary culture. And I say that because I've worked in organizations where the generation didn't dictate how we managed the people, and it was more so the client sometimes, especially if you're in financial services, retirement, wealth distribution, or it was more so because it was an organization that was looking for a particular audience or demographic. So I think I would sway that way. And either way, whether it's because it's an older generation or because it's a conservative company or because it's a traditional company, the best thing to do, I would say, is to anchor in what Cynthia shared about the data and the numbers. You can also pull that external data and numbers. You want to look and see, if I'm in the city of Boston, how many, if I'm only targeting this demographic and this is what they want, how many are left? Right? And how many are here? And what does that demographic need? To Alexa's point, like, what is the things that are going to draw in the employees that you need? I think that's one way of doing it. And I think the other way is to look at your competitors, right? It may not be the thing for your competitor space, and you need to be okay with that. That's a question that maybe you need to take internally and say, hey, I am working. And again, I'm going to go back to retire. I worked for a company and I was in retirement wealth distribution, and they targeted folks who were building out their portfolio for retirement wealth. That process, that organization, that company, their competitors are looking for folks who are doing the similar. So you may have to take a step back and say, hey, is what we're doing hurting us right now? Eventually it will, right? But it may be just a causal effect of the place that you're working in, or the workforce that you're working on, or who they are, who the target demographic is. And eventually that will catch up with folks because generations shift, but that may also be a symptom of it taking longer than other organizations or other industries.
So you kind of talked about the shift. So do you find that such a shift is representative across the industry, or more common among certain sectors, startups? Like, what do you think about this shift?
I find that startup culture and tech, I'm in tech, I've been in tech for a while too, and tech culture is generally more people experience, or that they're just, and that's because they're such a flexible organization, right? If you get into a startup and it's really small, folks are doing 3 and 4 different kinds of jobs, right? They're wearing multiple hats. And I think that employers and founders and co-founders know that, and they know that they need to flex to the employees' needs because we're asking them to flex to doing different work. I will say that, in financial services, it may take a little bit longer, right, for them to make that shift or to find that transition. And that may depend on what type of company. I've known some financial services companies that are kind of with it and they want to do it in this way. And then I know some more traditional ones, or ones that have been around for, 100 or so years, that are taking a little bit longer to make that shift.
Alexa, when we initially had our first meeting, you talked about you don't think that you can put the genie back in the bottle. You want to explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that totally holds true. I don't think we're putting this genie back in the bottle. I actually was just thinking, so if you looked at just the office perks conversation 15 years ago, it didn't really exist outside of Google, right? It was like the Googleization of the office. Oh my God, you get dry cleaning at the office. Like, that was like the end all be all, and it'll only ever be Google because they're this big tech giant with all this money, right? And now if you look at it, I work with local banks, I work with financial institutions, I work with all kinds of organizations that that stuff is commonplace now. Like, the expectation for employee lifestyle benefits just exists, and it's part of the generational stuff that Tasha talked about, but it's also just people know that organizations are doing this for their employees, and so once they catch wind of it, they go, well, why can't we do that here, right? So if you look at all of this as almost like a, I don't know, maybe a 20-year time horizon, we're just cracking the surface on this idea of changing the mentality to people operations, and it's going to take a while for bigger, stodgier, older organizations to get there. I used to joke, if you could get Wall Street to create perks for their employees, like we've done our job. And they do that stuff now. They have a lot more of that than they ever had before. And so I think it's a lot of this is on the trajectory forward. And with everything we've talked about in this conversation, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, because people can see that it's possible to have these things and have a great employee lifestyle at other organizations. They can see it on Glassdoor, they can see it on LinkedIn, they can see it in their friends' Instagram feeds, like they can see it. And so now that it's out, and now that I also think giving a voice, it's the whole reason we created the People Ops Society, like giving a voice to people like Cynthia and Tasha to say, you can do this at your organization. Here's how to be thoughtful about it. Here's how to change the paradigm with which we think about these things and get stuff done for your team that matters. That's changing, and you can't take it back. You can't just say, no, never mind, put them back in HR. It's just a cost center. We tried. It's not going to work. It's just, I think it's the conversation is so much more open now, and due to events like this and people talking about this subject, I don't think employees are going to go, yeah, I know you tried to do all that nice lifestyle stuff for me, and design a great experience for me, but I'd prefer to just clock in at 9 and leave at 5, and you can just pay me. Like, just give me health insurance and pay me, and it's fine. I just think that's over. I think that's done. I don't think the expectation is ever going to go back. In fact, it might just get worse.
I think I can't remember if it was Cynthia who said this, but kind of, I guess that like big companies are going to lose the war on talent if like we no longer become adaptable, nimble, and really representative of the people. We have another question. This is more, I would love to get all three of your opinions on this, is where should people ops report up to in an organization? When you add ops or people ops, do you see it move from CEO to CFO, COO? Where do you guys find that in your organization?
I'll speak to that for me. I am a part of a 50-person startup company, again, distributed across the U.S. And my role, title of director, I am part of our leadership team, our executive team. So, and I report into the CEO at this time. And as you continue to grow, one of the things that we'll have to be mindful of is how many people will report into you, speaking about work-life experience and creating a good one. I try to have a mental rule that try not to have more than 8 to 10 direct reports at any given time. So, but that's how we're structured, particularly right now. And that role and being able to be in this position, it allows me to be able to have influence and insight into how the whole business operates. And so for that, I'm very thankful. That might not be the case if you're talking about larger organizations. Again, we're talking about a 50-person company. I'd love to hear Tasha's perspective on this, because she's a larger group than we are.
Before I get to Tasha, I want to into CFO, COO, CEO. Do we also now see a shift where it's like CPO? Like, where do we see this? Tasha, I know Tasha can speak about this a little bit more too.
You cut out a little bit there, Joe, and so I didn't hear the whole question. I just heard the end, CPO and.
Oh, so I was talking about, so we talk about, or Frank brought up the notion that people ops reporting into the CEO, COO, CFO, but now there's the CPO. So where do you find that balance, or do you think that this is the shift that organizations are going to?
Yeah. So I heard Cynthia's response to it. So my organization is a bit larger, about 175-ish folks, still startup. And, I report into the CEO, president. I think that people team, HR teams, anyone who's managing that people function should report directly into the CEO or to the president. I've seen a lot with startups is that as they start to slowly think about people, and folks already know my opinion on that, but as you start to slowly think about people, they'll take someone and have them report maybe into a CFO or to a legal team. And I don't think that is the best way to structure your HR support, because it crosses all organizations and there could be a conflict. Right? There could be a conflict there. And, I enjoy working with my employment counsel when I have to, but anyone who's had to work with employment counsel also know they're going to look at it from the lens of risk, right? And the lens of the law. And sometimes you're like, as a people, as a person, you know, like, what do we want to do here? If you're working under the CFO, they're going to look at it from the first lens being finances and not necessarily the employee experience or the people experience or how that can attribute to attrition or something. So it's the lens for me that makes it only right to report into the CEO. You do see the chief people officer role. You see the chief talent officer role is another one. You see chief HR officer roles. And to me, sometimes they're potatoes. They do the same work. But it is ideal that you work under that function comes up under either the CEO or the president.
Yeah, I just have to chime in and say, your people team should almost never report to your CFO. It is a bad structure because you exactly to Tasha's point, they're going to put this lens on. It's like, I'm in charge of this line item and I need to quell the line item. And what you want in a healthy organization is you want that tension. You want the organization to have to justify why it is spending on people and what it is spending. And why that advances the organization. That's actually a very healthy tension. And I have seen time and time again organizations not view that tension as good and just stick it under finance or stick it even under ops. Ops tends to be under a pretty financial lens, and it can get very muddled very quickly. I also would say, since we're at Startup Week, and I've on my like 6th or 7th startup at this point, I have seen startups, what I've seen tends to happen is the organization starts growing really quickly. And all of a sudden they go, all right, well, we need a recruiter because we can't hire fast enough, right? We're just growing too fast. We need somebody to just get the managers and the team's people, right? And so what they'll do is they'll hire like an individual person. It'll be talent and something, and basically it's like a recruiter that they're going to throw a bunch of cultural stuff on as the organization gets bigger and needs those things. But what they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, it's just right now your goal is just talent management and talent pipeline, so we'll stick you over here because the CEO already has way too many things going on and we're this tiny team, so we're trying to optimize for efficiency. And what winds up happening is that part of the organization, that team gets stuck there as you grow. And that's not what you want. It is very hard to reorganize your people team out from under the ops lens or out from under the financial lens. You've got to make your first people hire. It doesn't matter what they do. If they're focused on talent or if they're focused on, policies or internal sort of, creation, they've got to report to the leadership team to start with. And again, I've done enough startups at this point to know, if your CEO is worried about the head of people reporting to them, that's a big red flag. And imagine what it says to your employees if you say, oh, well, our head of people, the person who's supposed to be in charge of us, doesn't even have a seat at the table. That's bad news bears all day. And you will just wind up being a cost center if you do not empower your people team. I cannot say that like vehemently enough. I have worked with so many organizations that it's the right intention, but the wrong execution, and it winds up really hurting them long term. And it matters. Like the people that you're hiring, when you get that first recruiter, like that really matters. And your CEO should be aware of the culture and the people that you're bringing in, because it can go south fast if you're growing very quickly. So you absolutely never, ever, ever want your people team reporting to the CFO. That's just a bad idea.
I agree with that philosophically. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Joseph.
No, I was going to say, let's move. Cynthia, I feel like you had something to say about this.
I absolutely 1000% agree with this philosophically, but I do want to share a really neat thing that happened with me and my former CFO, who I did report to at another startup before. He said to me, CP, if you and I agree all the time, then one of us is not doing our job. And I thought that was the most remarkable statement to hear. So
if only every CFO thought like that.
So
sounds like a gem.
He is, and I just want to put a plug out there that there are such things as people who are wearing these other titles and hats within the organization that are just as people driven. So as Tasha had mentioned earlier, Alexa, do your research on that company to make sure, even if I'm getting the questions answered about the organizational structure, learn a little bit about each of the person, see what they write about on LinkedIn or on their other social media. What is their philosophy like? Because they could be hiding a gem like I got to work with.
Awesome. So I know we have 7 minutes left, and I have like two more questions before I go down that path. So I report into operations. So now I feel like I'm like torn between this conversation here and where do I fall? But one of the before I go into the question is Tasha asks the panelists. So we will be actually posting our LinkedIn's if anyone wants to connect with us in the chat, just so you guys can connect with us. But Allison asked a question around DEI, and she said, let me pull it up, make sure I get this. There's a lot of content on LinkedIn about how DEI should roll up directly to the CEO. Do you all think DEI should fall within people ops or be an entirely different function?
Oh, can I jump in there?
Yes.
Someone who got their teeth cut in HR via DEI. So that was my first introduction into HR in my career. Couple of trains of thoughts there. One, DEI should run up to your president, right? Your president or your CEO. The challenge is that's not going to happen right away. That's not going to happen at a 50-person organization. It's not going to happen at a 100-person organization. It is, you need to get to a point where that is a role that can go up to that organization and influence that person. And that does not mean that DEI is not important. It is important when you are a 10-person organization, right? I think the real fail there is that we don't have enough HR folks who are versed in DEI. We don't have enough folks who understand equitable practices and diversity. And they claim to, and maybe they want to, but let's face it, let's just call it out. If we did have enough folks who had a background in DEI or who thought about equitable practices in their role, we wouldn't be facing what companies across the country right now are facing after the George Floyd killings, or after what we saw with Breonna Taylor and other things that have influenced the workplace, and called out companies that weren't caring about Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other underrepresented groups, right? And so if we had folks in people teams that had that lens, then we wouldn't be facing some of the crises that a lot of companies are facing now. So I think the other piece is grow up your HR folks and your people folks. If you want to be in this world and in this industry of being a people leader, you need to flex all those muscles, and you need to grow all of those muscles, and not just the ones that identify with the employee experience, if you want to bring folks to bring their whole experience and their whole selves to work.
So we do have 5 minutes. So Cynthia and Alexa, if you want to chime in, and then I'll ask the final question.
I just wanted to say, and amen to that, Tasha. I think hopefully the paradigm of people ops is starting to realize that the people on the people ops team have to be better equipped to just deal with people. Like, I know that sounds crazy, but if you've spent any time in HR in some organizations, you can say like, oh, okay, no one on your people team has any EQ. That's a problem, right? So like, I think people are starting to look critically at like, what is the development for these professionals? But to Tasha's point and to our earlier point, it's all about intent. If your D&I team is one person and has no budget and no authority and no ability to do or influence anything, then it doesn't matter where you put it in the organization, right? And I have seen actually largely big organizations do that. They do lip service to DE&I, they hire a person with a big fancy title, and then they stick them in an organization with absolutely no reports and no budget, and they can't do anything. And it's like, well, we have diversity and inclusion. It's like, well, do you? You don't. You have a diversity and inclusion person who can't actually do anything in your organization. So I think, to Allison's earlier question, the DE&I thing, especially as you're growing, I think Tasha's right. It's hard to have everybody report to the CEO, and it's not going to happen overnight, but you have to empower that function from the beginning, and you have to empower that function regardless of where it is, or you actually probably face more detriment than good from even trying to include it if you don't take it seriously and give it autonomy, because it needs that to thrive. So.
Awesome. So last, I know we're cutting short on time, so I would love to get like your 30-second advice on, for anyone looking to get into people operations, what advice would each of you give? So we do have 3 minutes left, so let's try to keep this as quickly as possible. I'll let Cynthia begin.
I'll go quick. So if you're looking at looking into people, just remember that there are lots of different disciplines. Go to Google. So if you love networking, if you love connecting with people, think about talent acquisition. We talk about data, HR analytics, training, empowering others, learning and development, creating inclusive environments, DEI, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say this, try to, like I had said before, try to diversify. Always try to find opportunities to be able to jump on tiger teams or squads, doing cross-functional departmental work, and that'll be able to open up your experience, because you might find not only do you have a different skill set related inside of the people HR umbrella, but you might find a new passion as well.
Tasha.
I would also say, to add on to Cynthia's point, don't be shy about going for that entry-level HR role too, because you may get to find where your discipline is in that function. Usually when you get an HR specialist or an HR coordinator, they are open to seeing what's happening. If L&D falls under that road, what's happening there. They get introduced to sourcing and to recruiting in that role. They could get introduced to payroll, comp, benefits, people, generalist work. So if you don't know the realm and you don't know which way you want to go, try out one of those types of roles for size to get introduced into all the different disciplines, and then see where you're leaning to.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think you got to be, it's just people, like the title's intentional, like you have to get excited about figuring out how to implement things across an organization that are going to be equitable, that are going to work for everybody. Like, you have to get excited about dealing with all sides of a human. So if that doesn't excite you, maybe consider another profession. But if it does excite you, the one thing I typically tell people is don't underestimate, especially going forward. It's a very underdeveloped skill set I see across people teams. Don't underestimate the power of digital marketing. Employer branding, to Cynthia's earlier comment, is like going to be probably the single most important thing that organizations start to put dollars behind. And if you can market to your employees the way that you market your own product to customers, you will have a much, much, much more successful group. And so if you can get into an organization and say, hey, I can help you communicate, custom communicate and communicate effectively internally as an organization and handle your employer branding, that's a really big leg up these days. And it's going to be a very powerful skill set to have going forward. So don't underestimate that if you can do any of those things, that's not beneficial to a people team, because it is, and it is increasingly so. But you gotta want to figure out, you gotta want to solve people problems. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Well, it is 9 o'clock. I really do want to thank these badass women on the panel today. Like, it wouldn't have been possible without you three presenting your guys' opinion around and thoughts and experience around people operations. So I really just I want to give you a round of applause, but I feel like that's so
I'll clap.
hard to do with it.
It's amazing. You guys did awesome. This conversation was incredible. Joseph, you did an amazing job at moderating.
Thanks,
Thank
Joseph.
you so much. And thank you everyone for coming out. All of the round of applauses.
Thanks everyone.
All right, guys.
Thanks, guys. Be well.